all I do is bang the drum about how the entire criminal justice system is designed to strip the humanity out of the process. And my whole reason, what brings me meaning in my professional life, is to reveal the humanity of our clients. And I don't think that AI can do that.
Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing.
Hey, everybody. Doug Passon coming to you from Studio 3553 in Scottsdale, Arizona. Guess what? Today, we are going to be talking about AI, and I'm very excited and somewhat terrified, which I guess sums up my feelings about AI in general. But I would like to start by telling, before I introduce my esteemed guest, I went into the AI, into the whatever you call that thing, and I said, let's, I'm a music guy. So I said, write me a song to the tune of Stairway to Heaven about a lawyer lamenting the use of AI in the legal world and his concerns that lazy lawyers will use AI to do their work poorly. And I don't know if I should sing it to you or just read it to you, but there's a lawyer who's sure all that glitters is not tech, and he's buying a stairway to wisdom. When he gets there, he knows the courts are not for show. With a word, he can get what he came for. And it goes on and on and on. I won't subject you to any more, but I don't know. I was a little let down, but that's, that's what we're gonna do today. So listen, here's the big picture, at least from where I sit. AI is new, it's exciting, it's moving fast, and if it works well and people use it properly, maybe the possibilities are endless. But I humbly submit, I don't think it works very well at all. And the bigger problem is it has the potential to do serious damage, especially in the legal realm, which is, of course, where two of the three of us on this Zoom call today, that's the sandbox that we play in every day, all day long. So therefore, my particular thesis at this moment in time about AI is hell no, I won't go. But what I'm very excited about is I have two esteemed colleagues here that might, I don't know, by the end of this session, they might have convinced me. But let me introduce my two friends. First is Randy Olson, a friend, my story mentor, the progenitor, I guess, would you call him, of the ABT narrative template that I have been championing for so long now, and was fortunate to be able to co-author one of the narrative gym series for law with Randy. And Randy, of course, has published many other works, including Houston, We Have a Narrative, Don't Be Such a Scientist, and Narrative is Everything. He is a story expert. He's a narrative expert, and I love that he's going to bring that perspective to our discussion today. Welcome, Randy Olson. How are you? Thank you for being here.
I'm wonderful. Great to be here. Thanks, Doug.
All right. And my other guest is also a very dear friend and a colleague, attorney Patrick Barone. He's a prominent lawyer based in Michigan in the Detroit area. He's also a board certified practitioner, teacher, and educator of psychodrama, sociometry, and group psychotherapy. So he also is bringing a very unique perspective to this. And he is, I have really just recently learned, a super huge fan of AI, and especially using AI in the legal practice. So what I would like to do is give each of these fine gentlemen their time for their opening statement. We have reserved 5 minutes for each of you, and I'm going to throw it to Randy to get us going.
Great. Thanks, Doug. And, the basic concept here between the three of us is we've got a continuum. You are towards one end of more pessimism. Patrick's more towards the other end of optimism. And I sort of oscillate back and forth. And so that will be the structure of what I have to say here. And I want to begin my little 5 minutes with reading to you a letter to the editor I had in the New Yorker 6 years ago, 2018. I'm not a very good writer, but of all the writing I've done, this may be the very best paragraph I ever wrote. It's really nice that they chose to publish it. It was in response to an article written by Joshua Rothman about the two main indices that people use to calculate how happy are we today. And so here's what I wrote. They titled it, How Are We Doing? In Joshua Rothman's article on whether the world is getting better or worse, he explores two metrics, quality of life and subjective well-being. But he doesn't address the most important metric, which is meaning. In the book, The Good War, Studs Terkel's oral history of Second World War, people who lived through the war consistently cited that period as the most meaningful of their lives. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived internment in Auschwitz and other Nazi death camps, subsequently wrote Man's Search for Meaning, which in a survey of the Library of Congress in 1991 was considered to be one of the 10 most influential books in America. Quality of life and subjective well-being cannot be evaluated without discussing what is at the core of true happiness, that one's life has meaning. So that's my first point. And this is, I begin on the broad level with the idea that I'm pessimistic about this artificial intelligence as a large scale topic. And part of the problem right now, all of these so-called experts, Sam Altman and Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, whoever, I don't see a single one of them talking about this word meaning. I'm not sure that any of them really even understand what meaning means. Most of them, I think, in some ways are too young to really have developed the context in their lives to really grasp how important it is. The word has a lot of significance to me because I'm 68 years old and I lived a life in the 1960s and 70s and even 80s that I felt had a lot of meaning. But that's part of why I left my science career in the late 80s. After I'd gotten tenure as a professor, was I began to just look at things and go, what's the meaning in all this stuff? And this is what science and technology has brought to us on a daily basis now, is a failure to make people feel that their lives have meaning. To the very opposite. Everybody looks at Twitter now, and if you don't have 5 million followers, it's clear your life has no meaning. I've got 53 followers. Good. You're meaningless. You're useless to society. That is the message that comes across from the world of science and technology, and they do not understand that dimension whatsoever. That's what this letter was about. And until I hear one of them having an in-depth discussion about meaning, and because if you're a member of the general public and eventually feel your life has no meaning, then you start to suffer anxiety and depression and contemplate suicide and maybe even become a mass shooter. All of these things are symptomatic of a general public that feels their lives no longer have any meaning. So that's my big picture statement on AI, which is at the biggest, broadest, and longest term scales. I'm very pessimistic because I think the people that are creating it don't have this human side to them. I've worked a lot in the world of science and technology, and I've seen it up close. That is what scares me. Now, in contrast, down at the small scale, on the daily level, I am thoroughly enjoying ChatGPT and using it day in and day out now. And it is so much fun and is so powerful and so effective. And I use it for a piece of fiction writing I'm working on right now. And all I have to do is type in any time period and ask them what kind of shoes do people wear then. It'll give me an answer. The only thing you need to do once you get the answer is then go verify it, but at least guide you right to that if you know how to prompt it. So that's really, really fun. And also a few months ago at a science meeting, I did a demonstration where I took somebody's 500-word synopsis abstract to their presentation, put it into ChatGPT and said, shrink this down to 100 words using Randy Olson's ABT narrative framework. And it instantly did that exactly 100 words, and it had perfect ABT structure. That was amazing. Everybody in the room was like, wow, what people came up to me afterwards like, what is this witchcraft? How did you do that? And so that's very, very cool. And then you can say, shrink it to 50 words or 20 words. The smaller it gets, the less you can actually achieve narrative structure. That's one of the dynamics that we've come to realize. But it means on a daily basis, it's really cool and powerful, and that's fun. So that's where I end up right now, is that I'm back and forth on this continuum. At one end, I'm pessimistic with Doug about in the big picture and long term, and the people that are generating this stuff just don't have any understanding of what they're doing. But on the small scale daily basis, I love it. It's fun. Yay, just like robots that will eventually ruin our lives. Yeehaw, let's have fun while we can. Okay, that's my statement.
Thank you, sir. All right. Well, I will reserve comment and go right to Patrick. Your opening statement, counselor.
Uh, wow. Well, that was profound. I wish that we could move now to the sublime, but I don't think we're quite going to get there in my statement. So
Therefore,
I'm just going to give you a history of my use of it and some examples of how I used it and why I'm so excited about it. And I first became aware of it as soon as it was released. And as I think all three of us share many things in common, but one of them is we are all prolific writers. And as for myself, I've written several books. I've written an additional several book chapters. I've written over 100 journal articles for different law journals. And I think of myself as a pretty darn good writer. The problem is that writing takes a lot of time, and I'm a perfectionist. So everything I write, I have to write several drafts, keep revising it, get the drafts down. What often happens is I'll decide, oh, this paragraph actually belongs up here. I need to reorder things to get it so that it flows better from beginning to end. My thoughts are in the proper order, etc. So what I initially started to do was experiment with it, just like everybody else probably does. You just enter a simple prompt just to kind of see what it can do. And I had some fun with it. And then when I started to write my 2024 update for my book, Defending Drinking Drivers, I decided to upgrade to the 4.0 version. I got a paid subscription to upgrade to ChatGPT 4.0. And this is when I really started to learn more about how to use it. And I used it extensively in my 2024 draft, which I just submitted to the editor. I use the word draft. I pick that word very carefully because what I don't do with ChatGPT is ask it to produce original content. I don't do that because, frankly, I don't think it's very good at producing original content. I'll speak more about that in a few minutes. But what it's really good at is being an editor. So what I found is that I use ChatGPT almost as if I'm in a co-authorship position with another person, that person being ChatGPT, and we work together on producing the final content. So I'll produce the first draft, I'll input it to ChatGPT, I will ask ChatGPT to act as a law review editor. So I'll say, act as a law review editor. In that role, produce your output as a law review editor. So I'm essentially programming it, telling it how I want it to act. Then I will provide the content and it'll provide the output. Almost always, the second draft, that being the one that ChatGPT produces, is better, in some cases, a lot better than my original draft, which is humbling. And it's a little disheartening because I do think of myself as a good writer, and ChatGPT just makes it better almost every time. But because I'm a perfectionist, I always have to put my thumbprint on it. So I don't ever take the second draft that ChatGPT did and use that. I go through it again. I add my own thumbprint to it. I make my final revisions. And then often I'm at a position where I have a final draft. So I can do all of that a lot more quickly than I could if I was just doing it on my own. So it speeds up my ability to produce high quality content. The second thing that I've done is, as far as using it in my law practice, and Doug, you know all about this because sentence mitigation is your specialty. One of the things that I do in sentence mitigation, at least the sentence mitigation phase with my clients, is I'll have them prepare for their statement, what we lawyers call the right of allocution. So I prepare them for the right of allocution. What I typically do is I tell the client, look, I need you to prepare a statement for the judge. This is something that's really important. These are the things that I want you to cover, just sort of an overview. These are the topics I want you to hit. Just do like a hot pen technique, free flow of thought. Give me what you got, and I'll look at it and we'll work on it together. And what I get from the client inevitably is a free flow of thought. It's a disorganized mess. It's a jumble of ideas, and it's almost never very coherent. And so I typically, before ChatGPT, would spend a lot of time just helping the client find the right words to better express themselves. Again, I'm not putting words in their mouth. I'm not telling them what to say. I'm just helping them express what they need to have expressed in a more effective way. Now, when I first learned about the ABT template, I'm totally an acolyte of the ABT method and Randy's narrative template, and I use it all the time. So I thought, okay, I have this statement from my client. It's in first draft form. I'm just going to experiment with it and do exactly what Randy did. I said, act like Randy Olson and put this in the ABT narrative template. And what I got back, just like what Randy said, I was just enchanted. I was absolutely delighted because it took my client's jumbled mess and put it into a rough ABT format. Now, I shared this with both of you so that you could see what it looked like. It was not by any means a final ABT, but it was a very good working ABT starting template. And now I do that all the time. I take what my client has written, I input it, get it in the ABT format, send it back to the client, explain to them better exactly how I want them to express what they want, what they need to express, things that they need to include, and we'll work together. So ChatGPT, again, acts as a very, very good writing assistant. Now, just today, another example is I got a whole bunch of new written paper discovery on a particular case I'm working on. I reviewed all of it and I prepared an email to my client. What I typically do is I'll send an email to the client, I'll attach a copy of the discovery, and I'll provide my preliminary analysis of it. I'll identify any factual or legal issues that may exist, tell them what I'm thinking as far as my summary of the potential defenses for their case, and I'll send it to the client. So I thought to myself, well, let's see how ChatGPT might work with this email that I just prepared. I inputted it. Sure enough, it took what I wrote, added subject headings very nicely, headings for each section, reassembled it, and wrote it in a way that more effectively expressed what I was trying to express. It just did it better. And so I ended up taking that, modifying it slightly, and sending it to the client. So those are just some of the ways that I use it. And the more that I use it, the more it's becoming an indispensable tool for me. Like I said, it's like having a writing assistant sitting right next to me, helping me every step of the way. And I will say, because I don't have a completely optimistic view of it, what ChatGPT can't do yet is engaged in the nuanced type of advanced analysis that you and I, Doug, can as legal professionals, and obviously Randy can in his scientific endeavors. After many, many years of experience, you have an ability to look and think in a very sophisticated, nuanced way that completely escapes ChatGPT at this point. So right now, I feel like I have no danger of being replaced by ChatGPT. Whether or not we'll get to that point, I don't know. I think we might, and then it becomes a very scary thing. And I'll talk more about why that's scary as we get further into the conversation.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Well, I don't know if I have a tight five, and I almost don't know where to start, but I will say this just for the record, we've been talking about the ABT a lot, and for those who are listening and are like, what the hell are they talking about? We're not talking about the ABT today, but we've done a lot of podcasts and we've written books. So I'm going to put all those links in the show notes if you really want to know more about that. It's an amazing narrative template that will help you be the powerhouse communicator that you were meant to be in a very clear, concise, elegant, beautiful fashion, thanks to Dr. Randy Olson. So put that aside. I just have a real quick question for you, Patrick. So when you write something, and you are you're a fantastic writer, you're also a devastatingly thorough writer, and I'm kind of curious when you put your work into, and first of all, I think that if there's a use for ABT, that's the right use, which is you're doing the work, you're doing the heavy lifting. This is coming from your big brain, and then you're getting a polish. Okay, I can almost deal with that. But I'm just curious to know, when it comes back, you say it's better. What's better about it? How is it better? Why is it better?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's hard for me to articulate exactly why, but I've been thinking about this because that's a good question. Why do I think it's better? I think it's better because the way that large language model artificial intelligence like ChatGPT is trained is by feeding it tons of published work and having it learn how the different words are typically in conjunction with one another. And then it predicts how those words should be aligned for the work that it outputs. So it's a prediction engine. And the prediction is based on the way that it's seeing words assembled based on everything that it's viewed. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but that's essentially what it does.
Are we talking so stylistically it makes your communication better? Or are you talking about citations and substance?
Oh, well, I'll talk about both if you want me to, but I'm just explaining to you that my understanding of the large language model, artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence like Chat GPT, the way they're trained is by reviewing, reading, however you want to phrase it, a ton of published works. So all of Shakespeare, all of whatever, I mean, you just name it, it's read it, presumably. Well, I haven't done that volume of reading. I may have read a lot in my lifetime, but not as much as ChatGPT presumably has.
Yeah.
So it can actually assemble the words in a way that is more eloquent than I'm able to. Maybe that's the best way for me to say it. Not always. Sometimes it gets it wrong, and I'm not happy with the output at all. But often I find that it does a really good job expressing what I want to express more eloquently. Now, the one thing that I know is the Chat GPT has the capability to do, but I have not yet gotten to the point as a user of programming it to be able to do this, is to learn more about how to adopt my writing style so that the output will be closer to what I would actually write myself.
Yeah.
There are ways to engineer prompts so that it will do that and to train it over time to do that.
Right.
And I'm learning more how to do it, but I'm not there yet.
Well, and I think it does bear pointing out that you're not the average AI user, Patrick. You're someone with a very sophisticated knowledge of computers, SEO, program. Like you swim in those waters. It's like giving a 12-year-old the keys to a Ferrari sometimes. Like if you know how to drive that car as much as anybody, I bet.
Can I toss in a little aside that gives some perspective on what Patrick just went through there?
Please.
And this is kind of amusing, which is that the ABT structure I derived from what I heard first off from the South Park guys in a documentary in 2011. They used this rule of replacing, they call it. And they said, we go into our first draft of our script. Every time we see the word and, we ask ourselves, can we replace that and with a but or a therefore? I began researching it, found out a screenwriting instructor in the mid 80s who was one of the all-time greats, Frank Daniel, was the first guy that talked about this dynamic of these three words, and, but, and therefore. 2000, I turned it into the template of ABT in 2015, kind of wrote the book that was my manifesto on it, Houston, We Have a Narrative. And in writing that, a friend of mine was friends with Matt Stone, one of the two South Park co-creators. And he sent my chapter where I talked about them and, just kind of thanking them, sent it to them and just wanted them to know that I acknowledged, where it came from. Matt wrote back a very cool email and said I was welcome to quote this one paragraph. And this paragraph is very profound, as silly as it may sound. Let me read it to you. So here's what he said in his email was, hey, man, this thing, meaning the ABT, is really cool. There's anything Trey and I worked hard, that's his co-creator, Trey Parker. There's anything Trey and I work hard on, it's structure. Structure is so important and so hard to get right. We beat ourselves up so that causality is really there, or at least mostly implied. Then once we got the structure set, then we put some dick jokes and poop stuff in it, and voila. So that was their quote. I read it all the time in talks. But when you start to dig into this quote, you see there's a lot of knowledge in there. Namely, going back to that sentence, he said, we realize that structure is so important and so hard to get right. That's the essence of what we're talking about here with ChatGPT, which is it's getting structure right. That's 80 to 90% of the challenge of communication. That is the stuff that movie screenwriters slave over. All the other stuff, the dick jokes and the poop stuff, all your specifics of your law information, all the knowledge that you pride yourself on, that's the easy stuff. The hard part is how to put it together into a manner that's going to work. It's just like telling a good joke. If you don't figure out how to set up the joke the right way, then all of your witty stuff at the end isn't going to have any effect because you didn't set it up right. Figuring out that structure of how to set things up is infinitely challenging. And this is the semi-miracle of ChatGPT, exactly what you're talking about, Patrick, which is this thing that traditionally is what people have labored over. It's the whole reason that movie studios over the decades have had story development departments. That's what they do in story development departments. They take a screenplay and they have one development person after another slave over it, trying to get those pieces rearranged to get that structure right. Exactly what Matt Stone said there about South Park. That's the secret of the success of South Park all these years, is that every single episode has really great structure. They always tell good stories there that always work, come together. They've got great minds for that. And now ChatGPT has kind of canned that sort of skill into a single device that can now solve that hardest thing of all for you in just instantly. And that, you agree with all that, Patrick? Does that make sense?
100%. And that's what I'm finding more and more as I take something I've written and input it for Chat GPT's editorial revisions, is it inevitably rearranges it in a way that
Yeah.
makes what I'm trying to express more.
And this is the baffling thing for me when I look at all these people out there across the landscape teaching their own little communication courses, even teaching courses on storytelling, where they're not getting into this analytical dimension of structure like the South Park guys got into it. And I don't know what, they're focusing on that 10 to 20%. It's really easy to teach and to do, but they just don't have any entry point into the 80% of the challenge that the South Park guys talked about. That's the super hard stuff. And if you don't have some sort of model like the ABT to break it down to be able to do it analytically, you're just arm waving. And that's what happens. And it turns out there's a bunch of money to be made out there teaching courses where you arm wave and everybody goes, oh, we're getting better. We're learning to be storytellers in one day. It ain't like that,
All right, but not for nothing.
Yeah.
My guess is Trey Parker and Matt Stone were on the picket line when the strike was happening, because one of the elements of the strike is fucking AI is going to replace all the screenwriters and do our job for us. So, but let me put a pin in that. I haven't had my opening statement yet. So,
Well, one comment on that. I think
Yeah.
they're deep into AI stuff. That's
Are
one
they?
of their, yeah. What's the fakes term? Deep fakes. Yeah, they're into deep fakes. Their newest project is about that. So they're actually on the cutting edge of that insanity. But sorry, keep going.
But no, well, but
Doug, hang on, let me just follow up
yeah.
on one thing. I just want to put this in at this moment so that we don't lose the train of thought.
Okay.
Because when Randy was speaking, I had an epiphany, which is that ChatGPT, I mean, it's a computer and it's trained to do this. It's really good at pattern recognition. And that's what it's doing. It's recognizing the patterns in what we're inputting and connecting the patterns together. That's why it becomes more coherent. It's able to reassemble using pattern recognition. That's basically how I'm thinking of the way that it works.
You're absolutely right. And the machine learning guy that we work with from GH Labs, that is one of the groups in Seattle we work with, he's constantly saying that you got to realize this AI stuff, it's nothing more than just the ability to predict what should come next for the next word based on everything you're talking about.
All right. Well, so here's the thing. Patrick and I had a discussion offline when we were talking about chat with AI, and he said, how much of this, Doug, is your ego that nobody does this work? You think nobody does this work better than you, and no goddamn machine, this is my paraphrasing, Patrick doesn't speak like that, I do, but no goddamn machine would ever be able to replace the magic that you make in sentencing. And I think he's right to a certain degree. And here's the thing. You talked in your opening statement, Randy, a lot about meaning and the human element. And, if the whole reason I started this podcast, at every introduction, it says to bring more awareness, more fairness, and what? More humanity to the process. All I do is bang the drum about how the entire criminal justice system is designed to strip the humanity out of the process. And my whole reason, what brings me meaning in my professional life, is to reveal the humanity of our clients. And I don't think that AI can do that. And I'm
with you on that. Keep going.
I'd be shocked to know if it ever could. And what I do, and it's why I left my day job at the Federal Defenders and went out to do sentencing mitigation videos and sentencing storytelling and narrative and all that, those waters that I swim in story, because that is what reveals the humanity in this process. And so I'm really a creative. I think I'd like to say I'm a creative person. I create content. I make movies. My passion in life is singing, singer-songwriter stuff. Great. So I wanted to give AI a fair shake. And so I went in there and I've tried it in a few different occasions, a few different contexts. And I thought maybe I could just share a little bit with you here of what I came up with. So the
You gonna sing
first,
this to us?
no, but I sang, well, but that's the other thing. Like AI could probably write songs for me now, but I don't know if they'd be any good. But well, why don't I start there? Shameless plug, but I'm releasing my first record, right? And I went in there and I said, okay, I want to make a graphic for this song I wrote. It's kind of like my origin story, and it's called Hospital in Duluth. And it's about the town I grew up and blah, blah, blah. And I went in there and I gave it a prompt. There's a very beautiful prominent bridge in Lake Superior called the Aerial Lift Bridge. And I wanted that to be a centerpiece. And I'm a singer-songwriter. I need a guitar and everything else. And actually, I tried it a bunch of times before I got anything remotely close to what I like, but I really kind of dug this. I'm sharing it. So if you guys are listening to this podcast, maybe you have to go to
That's
YouTube,
pretty
but
cool.
it is
That's
pretty
pretty
cool.
cool.
But do you see any problems? Is there a but in this ABT?
Well, there's an I missing. I can see that.
Yeah. Do you know how many fucking times it made that? And that is the least egregious misspelling that has been made in these things. But like Duluth with three U's or like, and I'm like, the word intelligence is right there in the name. And I put this in quotes. I typed it right. And you can't even fucking spell. AI doesn't know how to spell when it comes to
Okay, so let me make a quick
graphics.
comment on that because my buddies that are deep into the AI world, are connected with people deep in that world. A year ago when ChatGPT came out, a little over a year ago, and I began saying to them, it's great, but look at all the mistakes it makes. All of them the same answer over and over again. Give it time. Give it time. Eventually, it's going to make zero mistakes. I'm not sure I buy that. I think there might be a saturation point for it where it's got so much garbage going into it already right now. And every couple of weeks, there's another story coming out about how it went haywire here and there and there. Humans are just, there's an element of stupidity programmed into the DNA. And there are two great books that people should all be aware of. My favorite journalist of all time, just about these days, a guy named David H. Friedman, who wrote a book in around 2010 just titled "Wrong," how the experts get all these sorts of things wrong, and that was kind of on the heels of an older, more classic book, "The Experts Speak." Both of those are the same thing. Look at the enormity of stupidity from all of these credentialed experts over the ages, and not just nutball conspiracists, but actually mainstream super credentialed doctors, lawyers, whatever. It's woven into so much of the fabric of what we do on everything. There is no profession that gets everything right. How do they think AI is going to somehow hit a point where, oh, we finally cured the last mistakes? There's going to be garbage in it all along. I think that's a hypothesis. That's a fundamental divide there. Do you think it'll hit
Well,
100% accuracy, or do you think it's never going to get beyond about 70 or 80%? There's always going to be a bunch of this garbage. Patrick, what do you think on that divide? Which do you vote? Do you think it'll hit 100%?
No, in fact, it's conceivable it could get worse. Uh, because here's a question, and maybe you can answer this, Randy. I've been thinking about is I know that I'm helping train it by providing all this input. Now, what if everything that I was providing to it was complete garbage?
There it is. Yeah, right. And people have said that
Then,
from the start, garbage in, garbage out. And then the AI experts say, no, this is different. But it's not clear that it is different. I was willing
right.
to start to buy that a little over a year ago, but now it's been a year. And one of the fascinating things that nobody predicted is now with ChatGPT, you ask it a year and a half ago, we played this little game of balk or bullshit, with our little group. You ask it a question and will it balk and say, I'm not qualified to answer that, or will it just go ahead and bullshit? And it's pretty fun to try and guess for each one. Now, when you do it, take a look. It comes out with all these qualified things. Well, go look at this magazine and go look for some books on this. And it's now delicately backing off with all the confidence it had early on. And, that's not as powerful as it once was, but then it was powerful with bullshit. I don't know.
Yeah. Can I
but
can I
that's
talk about that?
but you guys are kind of making my I feel like you're kind of making my case for you because you talk about pattern recognition. It's going about, but you're a scientist, Randy. Garbage in, garbage out is the arch nemesis of the scientific method. So how do you know this pattern recognition that you're doing? How do you know, Patrick, that of the million articles that GPT digested to help you make your piece, that didn't plagiarize a paragraph or two?
Well, the stuff that I'm asked, I told you, I'm never asking it to produce original content.
Mm-mm.
So I'm not
But
I'm not worried
you've
about
done
that.
thing and it's got patterns and it goes and reads these other articles and spits back a better version of it. And you don't know. First of all, you don't know if it's, you have to go back and double check that, but
Right.
garbage in, garbage out. What are these patterns that it's
Well,
recognizing? And can I just give you what I think may be a good example in the legal world, which
okay.
is
And I'd
I
like to give you mine from today. Something I did today.
okay,
No,
please.
go first.
Oh, okay, are you sure? Because you are
Yeah,
my
of
guest.
course. Yeah, exactly.
And by the way, I am drinking tequila now because it's definitely after 5 o'clock, at least on your clock, Patrick. And I do like a connection tequila to the topic, and this is as close as I could come. I'm drinking G4, amazing, but Chat GPT, so that's as good as I could come up with. I'm sure if I consulted AI, it would have recommended a far better tequila selection for today's.
After enough shots, it all makes sense.
It all makes sense. Anyway, I went in and said, we do sentencing letters, our stock and trade, which Patrick and I are on this kick, and we don't necessarily think these sentencing letters are always that effective if they're done in sort of a ho-hum normal sort of way. And I went in and said, I would like you to write a sentencing letter for my client who's convicted of bank robbery, and he has a good job, and his family really needs him at home, and all the sort of ho-hum things that lawyers like to present that really don't move the needle. It's sentencing, and it came back and it wrote a sentencing letter for my client, and it looked like 100 other sentencing letters that I've received in cases in any other case. I mean, it was a very competently written. It could pass. In other words, I could sign Joe Dickwad's name to that and send it to the judge, and the judge would be none the wiser that I just created something out of whole cloth. That would be a problem, obviously, in and of itself. But if this is garbage in, garbage out, Patrick, we together profess that if you want extraordinary results, you have to take extraordinary measures. You have to do better than what is done before. And what Chat GPT is doing there, I think, is pattern recognition. This is the same old shit that I know that lawyers submit on behalf of their clients. Therefore, let me serve you up this platter of same old shit. That's a perfect example of garbage in, garbage out, and it's a perfect example of why I don't think this thing can do the job at the quality and caliber that we do it.
Well, I think you put your finger on one of what I have perceived to be a major limitation of ChatGPT, which is exactly that. But what you've effectively done is asked it to produce original content. Now you fed it parameters for that content, but it's still, to use the phrase, produced it out of whole cloth, right?
Yeah.
It's it very much lacks, at least in its current incarnation, it lacks the ability to do that, at least to my satisfaction. So I am in total agreement with you. And another example, a little bit of a different example, but another example of that is the the example that I gave earlier about the email that I had prepared to the client to summarize their case. When I do that, I typically don't add case law because why would clients necessarily want case law? I'm not talking to the lawyer. But just for the heck of it, I asked ChatGPT to rewrite the same thing, adding Michigan authority to support each of the legal points made. And then it produced another draft and it produced exactly what I wanted it to do. The first case that it provided was completely fabricated, didn't exist. That was the case that it provided in support of the validity or the legality of the stop in this particular case. It involved a vehicle stop. I looked up that case. I couldn't find it. The citation looked legitimate. I'd never heard of it before. The second one was a little bit closer, but the issue in this particular case is community caretaker. You know what that is, Doug. It's one of the exceptions to the warrant requirement. And I asked it for authority, and it provided me with authority for Terry search. So it's close, not quite on point. It's not
Yeah.
very helpful. The other issue, this particular case involved a breath test, and the authority that it gave me with regard to the admissibility of the breath test related to a blood test. So it was a complete fail. And to Randy's point, I then basically said to ChatGPT as I'm communicating with it, that was a complete fail, and here's why. And so its response was not, I'll try to do better. Here's some additional resources. It was, I'm sorry, but I'm not trained as a legal authority. You should consult a lawyer if you want that kind of information, in so many words.
That's what it does.
So
It bails on a lot of things. All right, let me now jump in with the more elemental analytical perspective of what you guys, I think, are talking about, which is this ABT. There's three basic elements to it, the and, the but, and the therefore, but at a deeper level, it's about basically setup, problem, and solution. And of those three elements, two of them are very objective. The problem and the solution are generally pretty much simple. You go right to what's our problem? Our problem is we don't have enough money. What's the solution then? Oh, it's obvious. Therefore, let's go get some money. Those two things tend to be pretty simple to work out. It's that first thing that we've learned over time. It's the setup that is 80 to 90 to 99% of your challenge. And how you set things up, it's all the blue material. And this circles back to my thing about meaning. This is what's gone wrong in our society due to the information era today, is that we're losing that blue material. Look at all these rotten movies coming out nowadays. They don't have a first act to them very much at all anymore. Nobody has the guts or wherewithal or vision in Hollywood to be able to hold your attention enough to set up anything. As a result, buddies of mine working on major documentaries are telling me about any documentary that's about a murder. The murder has to happen in the first 2 minutes. We can't set up for 10 minutes of who these people were, what was going on, anything like that. You can't create context anymore. You've got to get right to the dead body in the first 1 to 2 minutes. Or if it's going to be about some big incident of a terror thing, of a bomb blowing up, you can't take 10 to 15 minutes to set anything up. You have to have the bomb blow up in the first 1 to 2 minutes, get everybody's attention. They're already scrambled and confused. And then you start feeding them a bunch of crap, and people, they wander along, but they're not getting anything at any depth. The whole challenge is in the blue material. The blue material is going extinct in our society. We're turning into a bunch of gerbils thanks to social media, because social media doesn't allow enough space to put any sort of setup and context in there. And that's what we end up with now is, and this gets back to your human element, Doug, which is, this is the difference, is that it's your brain, it's not ChatGPT, that does have the ability to know what needs to be the framing here, the setup, how we put this thing together before we ever get into it. And that's the part that ChatGPT probably can't really tell you. I mean, maybe it can if you know how to prompt engineer it enough, but more than likely, at least for now, you've got to have that ability, and that's still a human element, I think, that you're talking about.
I want to address.
Let me just ask you, though, do you think, because this goes to what you were talking about, Patrick, with prompt engineering, do you think the setup, the blue material, is analogous to the prompts, what you feed? In other words, blue material is meant to set the stakes. It's meant to connect us to the story, and it's
tells us why it's important.
Tells us why it's important. So is the corollary in this discussion really the prompts that you're putting into what you're telling ChatGPT to get back? Are you feeding it the blue material?
No, exactly. And again, one of my Hollywood buddies who's in the thick of the AI world, for 5 years ago, 2018, he started guiding me to these books to read. You've got to read this book, Our Final Invention, and a couple other books, Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark. So 6 years ago, I began to get the signals that this stuff was coming. And when ChatGPT came out, the first thing he said to me is, the future is prompt engineering. That's what it is all about, because that's how you use this stuff in a constructive way, is to know how to prompt it. And if you are just swinging in the air saying, tell me everything you know about this, you're not going to get there. You've got to know how to take what it gives you and give it the next prompt to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And again, if you don't have that, this is not a tool for brainless people. Brainless people are not going to suddenly do great work.
All right, so I'll put it to you, Patrick, because you know about prompt engineering, and I think you are operating at a little higher level. Practical advice: if I'm a lawyer, I'm going in GPT and saying stuff, I'm not getting what I need back. Like, what's your advice for prompt engineering?
Prompt engineering, as I understand it, and I am by no means an expert at prompt engineering. I am not a computer scientist, but this comes out of the computer science genre. And effectively what you're doing is you're programming the generative AI, and ChatGPT obviously is not the only one. It's the best known. It's what we keep talking about, but there's many, many others. What you're effectively doing is you're using English words to program or enter a computer program into the generative AI. So instead of using something like 4x or whatever, I don't even know what the different programs that are actually used for computer engineer or for computer programming. With prompt engineering, you're using English words. So you're effectively explaining to Chat GPT how to produce a particular output. And an example of that is one-shot or multi-shot programming. And the way that that works is that you give the Chat GPT or the generative AI a variety of examples to follow. And remember, it follows examples. It looks for pattern recognition. So I think with the appropriate with the appropriately engineered prompts presented in the right way, you could program Chat GPT to actually think much more like Randy and all of us do, but Randy being as you said, the progenitor of the ABT narrative template, to think much more like Randy. So when I say to Chat GPT, act like Randy Olson and produce output as if you are Randy Olson, that's an engineered prompt. It's telling it exactly what to do in a particular way. But I'm assuming that it knows who Randy Olson is and it knows what the ABT template is. I've not told it that.
Okay, but let me run through what you've just kind of gone through, I think, in simpler terms, which is one of the fundamental rules we teach throughout all of our training stuff in narrative is the power of storytelling rests in the specifics. That was hammered into my head in acting classes 30 years ago, and it resonates through everything. And it's a fundamental rule everybody needs to know. It's like when you see some Senate inquiry, and they're trying to do the interrogation of a bunch of mobsters or something, and they want them to name names. Don't tell us a bunch of guys did this thing. We want to know specifically what is the name. As soon as somebody mentions a name, boom, the power comes in right there. It's that same dynamic with prompt engineering, which is that you can ask the thing, give me a good song for somebody's birthday party, and it'll give you something. But now, do you have the ability to get more specific? Okay, wait, that's nice. But now specifically, this is a person who was in an accident 5 years ago. Can you tell me blah, 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 blah. And the power of storytelling rests in the specifics. Prompt engineering is pretty much the same dynamic, which is learning the ability. The more you can get specific with this machine, with this Chat GPT, and push it into those things, it gets more and more powerful. And sometimes you want to be general so that you're not powerful, so you can run things past people and they don't get it. But this is one of the key things that comes out of our ABT training is understanding the dynamics of specifics versus generalities. And that, I think, is the number one attribute of ChatGPT, is of this prompt engineering thing, is developing the skill to push it deeper and deeper, because there's all this potential that's there. But if you don't know how to push it into the specifics, then you're not tapping into that.
So I know we're running short on time, and I want to get Randy's opinion on this because I know that he's read more than I have, I think, about this particular topic. And you've spoken a lot, Randy, about the concept of meaning, and I'm 100% in agreement with you. And I think that there is a close association between what we think of as meaning and what we think of as truth. And many of us who have a strong spirituality, we look at something like the Bible as a source of truth, and we find meaning in that. So sort of understanding that as a metaphor, what I'm worried about is, and I think that this is almost certainly going to happen, is as artificial intelligence in general becomes more sophisticated at producing output, we as human beings will no longer be able to determine what is actually true. So let me give you an example. I just told you about the case where ChatGPT gave me a citation that was a fake citation. Well, how did I determine if it was a fake citation? I went to Google and I Googled it, and I was not able to find a citation. So let's just assume, for example, that ChatGPT knows that I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to try to find the citation. And it produces a fake web page that looks just like what I consider to be an authoritative web page. And it puts the content that it knows I'm going to be searching for on that web page. So now how do I know what's true? The AI has actually prompted.
Okay, people have to get beyond this word true. Stephen Colbert knew this 12, 14 years ago with his truthiness word. He made a joke out of it. Rudy Giuliani in 2020 on Meet the Press said the truth is no longer the truth. And all the Democrats could think to do was to ridicule him about how stupid that sounded to them. But he's absolutely right about that. The truth is it's no longer a relevant term, because Marshall McLuhan tried to warn about this in the late 1970s. He talked about what he termed the information maelstrom. He said, we're starting to produce so much information, we're going to hit the point where the amount of misinformation is going to equal the amount of information. And at that point, it's going to become a big maelstrom where you can't really figure out what is the truth. At that point, that's why narrative is so important. This is what I've tried to tell these Democratic Party people. They are so utterly incompetent on the topic of narrative. They keep reaching back to, we've got the truth on our side. And of course, the numbnut on the other side has got truth. He's named his social media thing that. But he knows at a gut level that we're in the information era, and science and technology has moved us beyond this word truth, which is why meaning is very important, because meaning connects with spirituality, and that ends up being really, really important. And I think people ought to spend more time talking about meaning nowadays. And yet, as I say, go back to all of these so-called experts on AI. They're fine when they're talking about the science of AI. It's just when they start trying to talk about our society and how it integrates with it, they're utterly lost. They're not taught. They don't have the humanities background. I know this from my science career. I witnessed this. When I was an undergraduate, you couldn't go do a whole science curriculum thing. You had to do all this humanities stuff. It was annoying. They got rid of all that in the 80s and 90s when I was a professor. I watched it all fly out the window. Today, you can start doing science in elementary school. What in the world are these people thinking? Let's make these people as one-dimensional as possible, and then we can't understand how when they finally become adults and they create these multi-billion-dollar companies, they have no idea of what they're doing to humanity. The scale of problems at that point are so enormous, but it all does track back nowadays too. That's why I wrote one of my books called Narrative is Everything, because it is. The truth is just a ridiculous word anymore to waste time on. Both sides think they own the truth. We see that, you're seeing it right now. Exactly.
Well,
Well,
you
I
have,
think
yeah, go ahead.
I think this is my prediction. This is my gloomy prediction, which is
Hey, we win, Doug. We brought him around to optimism.
I
Uh-oh.
guess. Well, I've been thinking this all along. I still love ChatGPT like you, Randy. And I love using it. It is a lot of fun. So I think we're headed to another dark ages. But the irony of the new dark ages is that it's not going to be the loss of information, which was the genesis of the first dark ages.
Right.
In this instance, the new dark ages is going to be, there's so much information. It's basically what you just said, Randy. There's so much information out there that, and I'm going to use the word truth, there's no way for us to know what's real, to know what's true, to know what's factual.
That's what I said about, Marshall McLuhan. And I don't know why nobody's picked up on this. You can find a couple little references in the internet, but the key term is the information maelstrom. It's now turned into a maelstrom. That's what we got in the pandemic. And I've tried on podcasts to talk to that about the biomedical community. They don't want to hear about that. They want to believe that science is all knowing and will save us from everything. And I'm saying, I'm sorry, but you're in the information maelstrom, and you now have this anti-vax community that is enormously empowered with misinformation. They're as powerful, probably more powerful in a lot of ways, because they know how to work the social media and narrative system, conspiracy, all that stuff. That's all the information maelstrom. I don't know quite what the answer, the solution to it is, but I know you better get braced and ready for the next pandemic, because the last one ended with complete communication collapse, and there's been no inquiry into what went wrong there and how we're going to fix it. They don't want to even talk about that. So, yikes.
Well, may I have the last word? I did have a couple other images to share, because the other thing that I did is when I do these podcasts, I always have a graphic. And so one of the last ones we did was on the sentencing guidelines, wanted to make it a little interesting. And I was doing these parallels between records, albums, right? This is the Guideline Commission's sophomore album they're putting out, whatever. So I went into ChatGPT, very simply, I said, I need an image that combines the United States sentencing guidelines with a record album. And a lot of things came out, and this was kind of the general tenor to it. So what do you notice here? We already talked about the horrible misspellings, but most of the images that are generated about crime and music, these are African Americans here. And this one looks like he's actually holding the mugshot sign, only it says the United States and to this guidines.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it looks like he's in shackles too.
It looks like he's in shackles, and there's and a lot, I mean, a lot of them were just like this. And I thought, well, that's something to think about. I don't know exactly what it means, but it was perplexing to me. But here's the thing, Patrick, I'll draw on what you said, and you reference the Bible, and I've done my fair share of studying of Bible with my tribe, and I had a really profound teacher, Rabbi Ed Feinstein, who said this whole Bible, we're Old Testament, right? He said these are myths with a capital M, designed to teach us truths about living. And McKee in Story says, all story is a vehicle to teach us universal truths about life. It helps us understand and make sense of the chaos that is living, right? And so this concept of truth and meaning, they're inextricably intertwined in that context, because we're all in a search for truth, and that truth is subjective. But there is definitely such a thing as objective truth. Right, Patrick, if you do a chat GPT and it comes back with a case site that doesn't exist, we know that that is objectively untrue. And lawyers have gotten in big trouble for not checking their work and submitting things that are just wholly fictionalized. And so I think my biggest concern is that the bigger problem is this age of misinformation and disinformation, that AI is a fucking weapon of mass destruction. And we're going to see it rear its ugly head in the 2024 elections.
And on that happy note from the tequila drinker.
Yeah. And the smaller problem is, I think it will encourage mediocrity, because not only will some lawyers use it as a crutch and not do their homework in the same devastatingly thorough way that Patrick Barone does his homework, but other non-lawyers, people in our space that pretend to be lawyers and think they have great solutions to clients' problems, will use AI, and it encourages mediocrity at best and really bad results at work. So I guess,
let me offer up my final little simplistic revelation that just hit me here, and I may be wrong about this, but it's making me think of hiring quotas or admissions quotas at universities. And the idea that with a quota, you might be bringing in people from other ethnicities that have lesser numerical credentials from what would normally get accepted. And the analytical science side would just say, you just score everybody out and you just take the top people regardless of the consequences. The humanities side says we got to do some of these things sometimes to try and achieve these human goals of getting a bit more diversity into the system. And we've got to reach beyond these hard, cold numbers. And at the simplest of all levels, that's kind of what this stuff is talking about, is that where is ChatGPT going to have that human element to be able to argue against hard, cold numbers? That's a little bit, I think, of what you're talking about there. And that kind of, when you just get into this robotocracy, and last but not least, the word I would encourage people to read up on Wikipedia is scientism. And that is a term I didn't know about until about a decade ago. One of my journalist buddies introduced me to it. It's this belief that science will cure everything, that science has the ability to eventually give us the perfect society. And I just don't buy into that. But that's what's behind AI, is scientism. And everybody should be talking about scientism and questioning it.
My final word playing off that, Randy, is if I'm right and we do enter into another dark ages, it's not going to be science that saves us. It's going to be faith, which is the same thing that saved us for the first dark ages.
Yes. That's
and I would argue that faith, at least in my conception of it, isn't a blind adherence to something that we can't prove exists, that it's an adherence to the idea that we are all connected and that we're all in this together, and that once we reveal the humanity of each other's journey, that we will all rise together, and that we're all looking out for each other. And that's an article of faith that a lot of people, that's an article of faith that's very hard to swallow in this day and age. And I don't know that AI is going to get us there, but I will tell you this: I will keep an open mind, and I will keep trying. I'll keep checking it out. But I wanted to say thank you both for doing this with me. This has got to be one of the most fun discussions I've had on the podcast.
Song, We're All in This Together?
We're all in this together.
Who's that song by?
Well, I think John Lennon might have written something close
Casey
to
and the
it.
Sunshine Man, or somebody like that.
Well, I'm going to remain just a naive little optimist, So even after 30 years of doing this work and swimming in these dark waters, I still believe in hope, and I still believe in humanity. So let's end there. Thank you, gentlemen. This was great. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.